You kind of forgot about
Godwyn the Golden.
Hey, thanks for stopping by. Elden Ring is such an amazing game, and I had a fantastic time with the DLC, but to end with Radahn and this storyline just left a very sour taste. For the record, I'm specifically focusing on how the story of Radahn was told in the DLC. There is a clear distinction between narrative and lore. From the lore standpoint, I actually like a lot of the thematic parallels the game draws between Miquella and some of the other important characters in the game. And on a deeper symbolic level, Radahn being Miquella's consort works surprisingly well when you start analyzing some of the real-world cultural and mythological influences. One of the biggest issues with Radahn being Miquella's consort is that there is a lack of build-up, both in the base game and in the DLC. The game withholds way too much information from the player to its detriment. If you didn't see any of the leaks, and you didn't do either Ansbach or Freya's side quest, you would only find out Radahn is Miquella's promised consort when you actually get to fight Promised Consort Radahn. And for a lot of people, that initial response would have just been absolute confusion. Why is Radahn here? That's not really a response you want to have with a major boss, especially the final boss for the DLC, which is most likely the only piece of DLC we'll get for such an amazing game. If you didn't want to be completely blindsided by Radahn, you could find out by doing Freya and Ansbach side quests, which are, in typical FromSoft fashion, pretty easy to miss. And those are the only clues you get that Radahn is Miquella's consort ahead of time.
As the Festival of War concluded, General Radahn's soul met an honorable end, but kindly Miquella wishes to revive it, which is fine by me. I know it would pain old Jeren, but war has always suited General Radahn best, and certainly far more than any honorable death. Endless war to invigorate the soul, as befits General Radahn, the Great Lion.
I was thinking that maybe FromSoft wanted to surprise players by just having Radahn show up, but if that was the emotion FromSoft was going for, I don't know why they would ruin the surprise by having Freya and Ansbach's quests. One of the biggest issues with Radahn being in the DLC is the fact that it's woefully underexplained. For instance, does Radahn even want to help Miquella? Unfortunately, we don't actually know for certain. Radahn's willingness to help Miquella really should have been established by FromSoft. That would have helped understand what exactly FromSoft is trying to convey. If Radahn doesn't want to help Miquella, then he is basically a puppet, and that would put Radahn in a very tragic position and would emphasize Miquella as a monster, perhaps not knowing what he's truly doing. But if Radahn does want to help Miquella, that would be a major point in favor of Miquella's goals being noble and achievable. It would emphasize the tragedy that the tarnished or the bad guys. I've seen a lot of good arguments about the nature of the vow between Radahn and Miquella. Personally, I think Radahn was charmed and coerced into making this vow, but I've seen plenty of arguments that maybe Radahn made the vow just as a way of humoring his younger brother, he wasn't taking it that seriously, or maybe Radahn made the vow but then he reneged on it, or maybe Radahn always was trying to honor the vow. Whether or not Radahn is actually a willing participant in Miquella's plans is a pretty important detail to leave to speculation. I have no idea why FromSoft is being so coy and vague with such a basic motivation for their final boss. For the record, I do appreciate a lot of the ambiguity in FromSoft storytelling. They have these very multi-layered characters that are complex, and reasonable people can differ on how to interpret them. For instance, I do like that there were multiple ways to interpret Miquella. You can see him as a hero, and his age of compassion would be good, actually. You could see him as an antagonist, maybe naive but deeply flawed. You can see him as an absolute monster, or you can see him as just a femboy twink. But when it comes to basic facts about a character's motivations and their actions, that's really something that shouldn't be left up to speculation and ambiguity. Having an ambiguous motivation, sometimes that can be explained by the fog of time obscuring their motivations and their actions. For the DLC, this defense is completely undermined by the fact that we can literally see into one of Miquella's memories, and this cutscene doesn't give us any new information. We know Miquella wants Radahn as his promised consort. In the cutscene, we find out that Miquella wants Radahn as his promised consort. So if you're gonna use this storytelling technique, why not show a memory that would actually reveal some new information? And the fact that we don't know for certain about the nature of the vow feels deeply contrived. Now, I have seen some people make the case that since Miquella isn't talking to anyone in this cutscene, this could mean that he never actually made a vow with Radahn, and that it was always just a heartfelt wish. But if that's the case, it needed to be much clearer that's what's going on in this scene. Even something as simple as seeing Radahn turn his back on Miquella and walk away would add some closure. Let's talk about the giant merman in the room. Going into the DLC, a lot of people were expecting to fight Godwyn, and it's not hard to see why. The Golden Epitaph was a sword made to commemorate the death of Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, and Miquella was also heavily involved in the Eclipse, an attempt to revive Godwyn and other soulless demigods. The game should have provided some closure to the Miquella and Godwyn subplots, so that way people wouldn't be expecting him to make a return. The fact that a lot of people were expecting Godwyn, and then you don't get Godwyn and very little additional lore, it's not hard to see why some people would be disappointed. It's just the nature of human psychology. If you were expecting fish and got steak, no matter how amazing and delectable that steak was, it would still taste a bit disappointing. There were absolutely plenty of gaps to be filled with Miquella and Godwyn. To be clear, I was not expecting Godwyn as the final boss in the DLC. I wasn't even expecting to fight him as a boss per se. The base game had two great opportunities for a Godwyn boss fight when you first come across this giant merman, but instead of fighting Godwyn, you fight Fear's OnlyFans subscribers, and then you have the opportunity to enter Fear's dream, but you step inside an 80s hair metal music video. For me, the fact that they didn't take either of these opportunities for a Godwyn fight, I figured they wouldn't have him as a boss. But it would have been nice to get some additional lore about him. I also think it was a massive missed opportunity that there wasn't more of a setup for finding out the identity of Miquella's promised consort. Who is Miquella's promised consort should have been a major mystery going into the DLC. There should have been all kinds of YouTube videos, Reddit threads, Discord discussions, all speculating and theory crafting on who this promised consort could be. It's a simple writing technique. Setup and payoff. So if you have no setup, you have very minimal, if any, payoff. I've scoured all of the game files, including the 1.0 version, and I couldn't find anyone suggesting a vow made between Miquella and Radahn in the base game, even though this might have led to their historic clash at the Battle of Aeonia. In the base game, there is quite literally nothing, nada, that supports or even suggests that there was a close relationship between Miquella and Radahn. The only possible exception could be this statue at the Erdtree promenade. We see younger versions of both Malenia and Miquella holding a larger third figure. When I found out that Radahn was Miquella's promised consort, I had the idea that this mysterious third figure could be Radahn, and I go into more detail in a separate video. But again, it's not clear at all that this is in fact Radahn, as opposed to Godwyn or Radahn or someone else. In addition, in order to fight Radahn, you only have to defeat 3 bosses: Messmer, Romina, and later Simps. The later gank fight makes perfect sense narratively and mechanically, and that does tie up pretty well with both Miquella and Radahn. And I really appreciate how the fight can drastically change depending on which NPC's side quests you might have done or not. Unfortunately, all of the storytelling with Messmer just feels completely isolated from Miquella's story. And that's especially odd because there was a cut line of dialogue where in the opening cutscene, Messmer would have said, "Miquella spoke of thee," when talking to the Tarnished. In addition, while Romina is a fine boss fight, the fact that the ceiling tree is at the Church of the Bud feels completely incidental. Like, the Stealing Tree could have been at the Sunflower or anywhere else, and I don't think it would have changed that much, honestly. Unfortunately, even by the standards of FromSoft storytelling, which is deliberately vague and ambiguous, the story of Radahn in the DLC I found to be the most frustrating and disappointing, and I'm going to show that by comparing Radahn with a few other amazing boss fights in previous FromSoft games. Let's compare the Promised Consort fight with one of its clear inspirations, the Twin Princes in DS3. As a brief refresher, Lotharic's refusal to link the fire is essentially the inciting incident for Dark Souls 3 even happening. And to get to this boss fight, we've already had to defeat multiple Lords of Cinder, and Lotharic is the last one we need to defeat. So there's already a lot of organic build-up to this moment, whereas in the Elden Ring DLC, the required bosses feel completely incidental to Miquella's plans. Even though Lorien doesn't say a single word, you can still feel the devotion he has for his brother, and you can also feel Lotharic's deep love for his brother as well, especially with this cutscene.
Rise if your word, for that is our curse.
Even if you haven't played the game, or it's been a long time since you have, you can still answer the following question. Does Lorien, this guy, want to protect Lotharic? Yes. Yes, he does. The fight itself is just absolutely fantastic. I think it's one of the best boss fights in the game, which is already stacked with some pretty fantastic fights. But if you stop to think for just a second, you'll realize that you're basically killing two brothers who deeply care for each other, and compare that to the Elden Ring DLC, where we don't know if Radahn wants to help Miquella. I honestly don't know what types of emotions FromSoft wants us to feel from this fight, aside from general awesome spectacle, which is basically the default for a lot of the Remembrance bosses. It's hard not to compare the last line we heard from Miquella,
I'll make the world a gentler place,
to the ending of Dark Souls 3. After you defeat Gale in the Ringed City and then hand over
the blood of the Dark Soul
to the painter in the Ashes of Ariendel, she says this.
My thanks. I will paint a world of that name. 'Twill be a cold, dark, and very gentle place. And one day, it will make someone a goodly home.
Those lines are a callback to Priscilla and DS1, but they also offer a glimmer of hope in what has otherwise been a dying and stagnant universe. I think this is a fantastic way to close out the trilogy. Now compare that to the final cutscene for the Elden Ring DLC. Unlike the painter in DS3, we know what's gonna happen with Miquella and his plans. They might have succeeded
before I fucking killed him.
Miquella doesn't add any new information or recontextualize what we thought we knew, and there's no real emotional impact. The collective reaction just seems to be, that's it? Really? Let's compare that to the final boss in Bloodborne's DLC, the Old Hunters. When we get to the boss arena and see the opening cutscene, we see the orphan crawl out of Copium. The orphan looks like an absolute monstrosity, but I also can't help but feel pity for this thing. And then we hear him cry. The final cutscene for the Old Hunters is short, simple, and deeply somber. It's masterfully done and ends the DLC on a very poignant note.
Ah, sweet child of Kos, returned to the ocean. A bottomless curse, a bottomless sea, accepting of all that there is and can be.
You get the sense of an overwhelming tragedy, even if you don't know all of the particulars. And that's the case even if you didn't read a single item description and you played all of Bloodborne the way Gurman intended.
Don't think too hard about all of this. Just go out and kill a few beasts.
I also want to address the complaint that fighting Radahn is just fan service. That was my initial reaction, but when I thought about it, I realized there was just way too much baggage to be fan service. To get the obvious out of the way, fan service usually doesn't come with gay incest. I don't think fighting Amazon Prime Radahn was a goal per se for FromSoft. If FromSoft just wanted to let players fight Radahn in his prime, there were much simpler ways to include that boss fight as an optional remembrance and wouldn't contradict the established lore. We could have gone to some type of dream state like with Fortisax or the Hunter's Nightmare in Bloodborne, and the DLC already had a perfect setup for this option. Freya is one of General Radahn's most distinguished knights, and Tiolier is an absolute simp for Saint Trina, and has a concoction that can put an NPC to sleep. So Tiolier could give us a similar concoction that isn't lethal to humans that we could offer to Freya, and when she fell asleep, we could enter her dream and encounter the Radahn from her memories. In addition, we got some deeply disturbing lore about Jaws, and that offers another possibility to fight Radahn. In the base game, when you defeat the Star Scourge, you can see Alexander stuffing himself with pieces of the General. So I could see the DLC having a continuation of the Jawbaron questline. Maybe in one of the jails there's an altar that you could use to offer up a piece of Radahn, and then you'd be able to encounter Radahn in an earlier state. I could also see the player having to go to the shaman village and offering up pieces of Alexander to the grandmother, which would offer a very nice and satisfying mechanical reward for exploration. I could see how that might conflict with some of the lore and the emotional setup they had. The level of buildup they have for Radahn would have been fine if he were a optional remembrance boss, and this actually worked already in the DLC with Rellana. I remember when after the preview event came out and people were talking about Rellana, Renala's younger sister, I thought they were trolling me. And incredibly, there's actually more setup in the base game for Rellana than for Radahn being Miquella's consort. See, in the base game, at the Copium Manor, there were the towers called the Three Sisters, and we also know that Ranni is the last of the Carian princesses, which implied that there were once more than one. And this is set up for a boss who not only doesn't have a cutscene, she doesn't have a face. I am fully aware that FromSoft in all likelihood won't fix any of these glaring story issues, but I do have a source of Copium. As a lot of people know, the Scholar of the First Sin edition for DS2 changed a lot of the enemy and item placements, but it also added all kinds of new item descriptions and drastically changed quite a bit of the game's lore. In fact, it even added a fully voiced character, Aldia, the Scholar of the First Sin, and my favorite character in the entire trilogy. So if FromSoft was willing to put that much effort to redeem Dark Souls 2, which is one of the FromSoft games, I'm hoping they could do a similar effort for the Elden Ring DLC. This would also give FromSoft the chance to gaslight millions of people, so maybe they can do that. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to know what yins think. I'm not sure how this video is going to go down, so do let me know.